All right. It's that time, my monthly live stream here at Head Canon Unlimited. We'll see who all shows up. And there's a lot of busy night on YouTube, a lot of folks doing things. But hey, this is my time. Give me that once a month. So those you catch us on the replay, you catch the beginning. Derek Collins, also known as Head Canon. You see me hanging around all the chats with 3POA. All that stuff. So just kind of let you know that I'm still working towards 500 subscriptions. I think I'm at 146 right now. When I hit 500, we're going to do a giveaway of a few prizes and stuff like that. So if you've not already done so, make sure you hit the like and subscribe. So that way YouTube picks that up. So tonight, it's one of the things I've been looking forward to. I've had some great guests on here so far. This is my fourth stream I've done. Started out with it's Chad, then went to Ryan Laserpants over at 3POA, and then last month I had Articulate Ninja as my guest. But this is somebody I've been wanting to talk to for a while, since I started regularly watching a lot of things. So I extended the invitation, and this gentleman graciously accepted it. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring my guest tonight. From well, we'll talk about all these things, but I want to invite everybody to welcome John Kukovich. I say that right, Kukovich?
Yep, that's it.
All right, excellent. So yeah, all my years of linguistics training has paid off finally. So John, it's a pleasure to have you. I know we got to talk a little bit. I know we got to talk a little bit backstage before we started. So just kind of, so I just recently really started getting into the YouTube thing. And, I think it was around, I already watched YouTube videos since YouTube's been a thing. But it was, I think around COVID is, when we had a lot of time on our hands. I was looking for more stuff to watch. I ran into this little show. I was, looking forward to, doing restorations because I had some stuff, because I had a little bit of stuff left over the years in my collection, and kind of wanted to do some of that. And so I found this channel called Retro Blasting, who hooked me up with analog toys, and and then from there they told me about this little thing called Action Force. That got started. That took me to 3POA, and I think it was in the 3PO podcast where I would see you pop up from time to time, and then I got more involved and started learning people. And then there's this other show that started called Figured Out with this. And I think really it was that Halloween episode before they launched Figured Out. They got, introduced to your son, Mikey. And then from there, you would chime in on the chat, and it was like, there's something about this guy I really like. I like the cut of his jib, so to speak. So then it started, and saw you on Figured Out. Then I got back and done some replaying the show you do on. Now, is that like a separate show, or that they do that JMK Customs does, or is that? So what's the name of the show y'all guys do on Sunday?
On Sunday, that's the Couple of
Kuks
show. That's just he and I and the projects we're working on. And then on Wednesday nights, JMK Custom Works. Mikey does painting and custom work, and he usually has somebody on there that kind of reads chat while he works. And I just joined him. I just recently started joining him on there. And then obviously Figure It Out is his show was the Canon. So
okay. So, but again, that's when I got you kind of, and we interacted in chat, a little bit. So one of the things I want to do, because my channel is mainly, like I said, I talk about toys, and a lot of, if you actually seen any of my other content, a lot's about the story behind, like why is this in my collection, or how I got this in my collection, stuff like that. So for me, this is a platform to talk to people I really want to get to know more about, beyond just the funny little things that we say in chat. So it's a
right.
So you have so can you tell me a little bit about your background? Because like I said, you guys both do some really. So when it comes to, you guys do a lot of stuff I wish I could do, or a lot of collectors wish they could do. is I want to fix this, or this toy would be great if only I could add these parts to it, or I like this, but I want to completely do a custom on it. I'm the kind of guy, I'm afraid to really tear something apart. One, because I was kind of brought up in that background of if you break it, there's no replacing it type of
Right.
type of deal. So
Those days are long gone.
But you guys like do some amazing surgery, but what comes out the other end is stuff I really wish I could do. So how did that kind of start? Well, did you have like a background that that led into that, or?
Yeah, I think probably a lot of that started. My dad was a busy guy, and but when he was younger, he was kind of a recluse. He said that he always did model kits, and his mom had shelves of models that was in his room, and he had a lot of space themed models, aircraft, mostly aircraft, hardly any like ground vehicles. So we built a model kit together, and I know I frustrated him terribly because I was super impatient. And I know a lot of people that build models are the same way. You're putting it together, you don't want to stop, you just want to keep going, but you got to wait for paint to dry. And sometimes you're like, yeah, screw it, I'm going to put it on anyway. I was that guy.
Mm-hmm.
So a little bit later, I got into actually military miniatures. He and I, when we would have our days out, there were three of us kids, but he always every couple of months would try to set up a time when he and I would just go to the city. We'd go to this hobby shop that we loved that had gaming things and miniatures, but they had a ton of military stuff.
Okay.
Back then, you could still buy like 1/35th scale miniatures at Walmart. There were plenty of that kind. So I built a lot of models, and I was never happy with them right out of the box. I always had to do something different. I always wanted my characters, when I painted them, I wanted them to have a special loadout. So I had tons of military books, tons of things like that. My dad was kind of a military. I mean, he was a history buff in that he had a lot of it in his head, but most of the books that he had were aircraft books. I remember there was a Wings of Power, I think, was the series that Time Life did, and every month was a different type of airplane that it would dive into. He got in on that, and then there was one that was about American military things, and somebody gave him a bunch of those, and so I had all those, and I was super interested in that, especially just partisan warfare and things like that. I always found that really interesting, and guerrilla warfare later, but so I think that's where it started for me. He and I also, when Star Wars came out, I was telling you earlier, like I didn't go to the drive-in until like 1980, or go to a movie until 1980, a real theater. All the time it was drive-ins. We lived in this little town. They had a drive-in theater. That's where we went to see such classics as Blazing Saddles and Smokey and the Bandit and Star Wars. And we ended up seeing Star Wars. He took me to see that movie 3 or 4 times at the drive-in. He just loved it, and watching Star Wars, I realized that there was a possibility to actually be a grown-up that made model kits for movies.
Yeah.
And of course, this was the 1980s. Everybody was a gatekeeper, and that stuff was really difficult to find information on how to ever do that. So I kind of put that in the back of my head. I focused on what I thought would be a good career, and that was automotive design.
Okay.
So I focused a lot of my art and effort on automotive design, and discovered comic books. And so I bounced around there, in that design era. Had an art teacher at my school. She was very supportive of that. I was kind of a pain in the butt for her, but she always supported it. I had a plan to go to the art center in Pasadena.
Okay.
I was going to go on a General Motors sponsored scholarship, and instead I kind of found out some other things in my life were going to change. and I did not go. I went. I got a job, which I didn't want to have a job. I really liked just not having a job. So it was after I met Mikey's mom. We went to school together, and we decided to get serious. He was coming, and it was like, okay, let's do this. So I got a job at a boat factory, local boat company, fiberglass boats.
So just to be so we're on the record, what you're saying is that like all firstborn children, they crush your dreams. Is basically what happened.
Well, I would say that is one way of looking at it. But then the day comes when you realize that was the better path, that firstborn was worth it, and you get to realize that in a time when most people would be coasting and just waiting for the kids to come by on the weekends or bring the grandkids over, I actually have this opportunity to do something with him that we both love.
Yeah.
And I can't even imagine regretting any of the hard work or any of that I put in just to be where we are today. People, I know other people see us and see our relationship, especially in the collecting industry or in the, I know the word community has a negative connotation, but in this group of people, in this sandbox that we play in, a lot of people are always like, man, I hope that someday this kid, he's a teenager right now. He's not speaking to me much, but I hope someday we have what you guys have.
Yeah.
And that isn't easy. There's a lot, I have tons of regrets, things that I missed because I put so much of myself into my work. But I started building boats, started at the bottom. Within 2 years, I was working in the R&D department. Another 2 years is in engineering. And then a couple more years later, I became the director of engineering at that plant. And that was all just based on my knowledge of how to build boats.
Yeah.
And so, we had this hotshot plant manager come in. He was a automotive guy. He was from the automotive industry. And he told me, he said, listen, kid, you may not have been to college, but I feel like 5 years of practical experience on the job is worth anything for what we need. We need a process, engineer. So I did that for a while, and then constantly would jump from that back to modeling and CAD work for the engineering departments and building prototypes and all that. And so all of those things fed into what I love to do. And that was, the original model building and building my own stuff and, scratch building airplane bodies and everything that I couldn't find a model kit for, I'd try to make, then I get into this job where I can kind of make anything I want, and so I did that. I did that for quite a while. I became kind of in the industry. I hate this term because it's almost silly, but a master mold maker. Like people knew that I had skills, and this company in Kansas City was getting ready to build a GT40 replica kit car. It was right before the Ford GT came out.
Okay.
And they wanted to do a replica of the original, and so I left the Bass Pro team for a while and did that. I built a set of molds for a GT40 replica, and we took it to World of Wheels that year. And then things with that company kind of got sketchy. And I told you earlier that every week that I was gone, the head of R&D at Bass Pro, at Tracker Marine, he would call me every Friday and ask me if I was ready to come back. And then one week I was. I realized that this wasn't what I wanted to do forever. This was not going to work for me. The company wasn't what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so I came back, and that's when early on I had before I left, they had started working with this 3D program called CATIA. And CATIA is a very expensive French software from a company called Dassault. But it had the brain power to do a boat hull. And a boat hull seems pretty simple, but a boat hull is actually a very complex shape. It's not even easy to make out of wood and Bondo, which is what we made the molds out of, but or the master molds out of. But but I got into that, and I remember doing that. And the head of R&D, he was watching me one day. He said, "Oh, so you've used CATIA before?" And I was like, "No, this is the first time." And he never forgot that.
Yeah.
Everybody else was in the exercise. You had to draw a mouse, like a click mouse. And I did that, and I was bored, so I just started making an airplane hull, and it was a tri-wing design, forward swept wings. He comes over and he looks over my shoulder. He's like, "You've done this before? You've used CATIA?" And I said, "No, this yesterday. I started when you guys did." And he never forgot that.
Yeah.
So when like I say, so I came back here, and that I did a lot of that, and did a lot of modeling. It just became really passionate, and I helped set up a design studio. We'd never really had a design studio for Tracker for Bass Pro. So I helped the guy that was the engineering manager. He and I set up a design studio, bought a really nice 3D printer, a real big one, a resin printer, and I set all that up and started resin printing. And I was hooked on it. It was something that I really loved to do. So that was kind of my thing. Like I just kept doing that. Actually, my real job for the company was a manager for BOMs. That's the parts list for all the boats, and I was in charge of all the boats that company makes, like every boat, every bill of material. So I could use, I had the chance there to be able to model things and use my creative side, and then the actual OCD and all of that got to be handled by keeping a list of every part that goes on every boat,
Right. Yeah.
and how that works with the sales screens and all that. And I did tons of that, and I was involved in web design. I was involved in all kinds of stuff, because it was you would think Bass Pro, as big as a company as it is, the actual Tracker Marine side of it, there weren't a ton of people.
Yeah.
There was a really pretty small team for the amount of product that we made and maintained and handled. So it was a good organization to work for a long time. And that's kind of that. I just kept doing that. And then, that's kind of been messed around this last year and a half or so with some stuff that's not necessarily going to help me, but I thought it would be good on a resume. So doing production manager stuff. But in the middle of all that, I met Troy, and we started doing call sign longbow and developing that line. And since then, it's been, dealing with manufacturers in China, in Vietnam, Colombia.
Yeah.
Dealing with how they do things and learning the entire design process of building a toy and getting it into production. So that it took years. I always wanted to do that, but I really never thought it was something that I could get away with,
Yeah. Because up to that point, you mainly kind of in the toy sphere worked with the, fixing the end product, you get the box. So you kind of knew how they were put together a little bit by taking them apart, because it sounds like in your day job, not only did you know what tools to use, you knew how to build the tools to use as well. With multi, so
and that was every step. I always felt like everything I was doing, everything I was learning, when you are managing that many lists for that many boats, you have products coming out every year, different times of the year, so you actually become a pretty good project manager.
Yeah.
You're managing your teams, you're managing how they interact with the sales team, engineering, and you're actually managing an entire project before the boat goes into production or the product goes into production. So project management, production management, all these different things. And it just seems to me like I'm at a time in my life where I think it's time to take all of those things, everything that I've learned, everything that I know, and start doing something with that in the industry that I love.
Yeah. I kind of experienced the same thing a few years ago. And how I described it was because, everything that had a strong quality assurance and process background, like, documenting process and writing it. So I knew, and so I got to the point where I told a manager one day, he said, I think I'm done. I no longer want to do, I no longer want tasks to complete. I want missions to accomplish. Where I was like, we build this thing, and I know how important having a process is, but everything comes out the same. It's like, now I want to get to where somebody says, here's what we need done, and I come up with how it gets done and the manner in which it gets done instead of following. So you can see where you get the boat making process and all that stuff down to a science, and then you come home and you look at your workbench, and that becomes, I have a vision for this. So this is my mission, and I'm going to determine the path to get to that.
And I can assure everyone that before lean manufacturing, my home work area and my work area were the same level of sloppiness.
Yeah.
Like I know where some things are, and then I'll put something down and lose it and spend an hour trying to find it.
That's why my desk, the other side that you can't see on the camera, that's the way that is right now with that. So tell me a little bit more about call sign logboat, how you got more into that and decided this is something I wrote. Was it something like you were kind of looking for something like that, or this was an opportunity that came along and it was scratching an itch you didn't know you had? Or
no, it was something that I thought would have been cool to do. I had done some 3D modeling. I modeled this spaceship from it was a canceled GI Joe spaceship called the Cobra Inceptor, and I had found a couple of pictures of an online auction. I turned it into a complete 3D model. And the last year that JoeCon existed, it was in Chattanooga, I believe. Mm-hmm. We went to that, and I brought the model along. And this is kind of a funny story. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. I was just going to walk around with it or whatever and just show it off. And Mikey and his mom and I were at a Hardee's in Paducah, Kentucky. And this was about the time that all the Toys R Us stores were closing out. And right across from Hardee's was a Toys R Us. And I recognized a couple of guys from Joe Customs and started talking to them. And I had been on some chats with them because I was working with, I was working with Red Laser Toys. They were making some, I don't mean this in a bad way, but they were making bootleg figures of original Joe pieces that painted different ways and coming up with exciting ways to do that. So I met the Red Laser fellow. I met him, and we started talking about, we could do this and we could do this. And all the time, I keep telling people this, like, I just want to make space toys. Like, I just want to make space toys. So Red Laser and I did some collaboration, and some of the guys from Joe Customs were on his brain trust pages, saw them there, and I said, hey, you guys want to see something that I made? And they're like, yeah, I mean, that's the kind of stuff we do. And so I took them out to the car and I showed them this spaceship, and they were just like, dude, you gotta display this at our booth. You got to bring this there. So I did the regular Joe Con, wait in line for 3 hours to get a crack at a toy that, is going to resell for 3 times as much next week.
Yeah.
Did all that like I was supposed to. And then at that show, I had taken some of Dan Klingensmith's Creating G.I. Joe books. I had taken some with him. At that point, 4 of them were out, and he had a slipcase cover for the 4. And at that show, Larry Hama was going to be there. Kirk from Hasbro was going to be there. Yeah. And a designer named Dave Kunitz. Dave Kunitz, his likeness was used for Thrasher and Ozone. And Dave was one of the vehicle designers. And so I started talking to him, and I had found out that he was the one that actually made the prototype of the Inceptor that didn't get made. So we started talking, and later on that day, he went over and looked at it. I think he was impressed. I mean, I don't know, a guy like that, you see so many things over the years. But that afternoon, they were doing a panel on the canceled 1995 line. And in 1995, there was a lot of stuff going on with the Battle Rangers and all that people know about. But they were really going to shoot for a really intensely detailed space line. Lots of new characters, lots of resculpts of older characters.
Yeah.
And so about that line, and they were talking about this Cobra Inceptor. And Dave said, if you guys want to know what the Inceptor really looks like, there's a guy named John Kukovich that made one, and it's over at a booth in the back corner. You should go check it out. And that night somebody told me like, dude, Dave Kunitz just totally name dropped you in there. So that night, Dave and I were at one of the get-togethers that they had at JoeCon where you can mingle with the creators and stuff. And he had told me, he said, if you ever decide to kickstart that, call me. I would love to do a video talking about how accurate it is.
Yeah.
So we kind of struck up, got along with him really well. I really, Dave's a really cool guy. These guys that we look at as, these guys that made the things that we loved as kids.
Yeah.
Last year at DFW, they had a workshop where you could work with all the Hasbro designers. And Mikey and I went to that, had a blast. Those guys are so cool. You could tell they were digging it, because we were lapping up everything they were throwing at us. They showed us like how they used to make the toys. Dave brought some vacuum formed parts of a Cobra stiletto.
Okay.
And Stellar Stiletto. So we were out there. He was teaching us how to break the plastic with a score line. It was amazing.
Wow.
It was so much fun. And those guys just walk around and work with everybody. You could also, in that show, you could just bring a vehicle, a couple of pieces that you want to put together, and they would help you like create something new out of what you had. It was so much fun. I always tell people it was the best fun I've ever had at a con. And so yeah, I mean, that's one of those things. Right after that, Red Laser was trying to kind of figure out. He was trying to find me some work because he knew I had the talent, and he was trying to get me in. And he was talking to Troy about a call sign longbow. They had at that time it had another name. It had a whole different. It was a whole different thing. They called it Project 86, I think is what they called it at the time. And Red Laser's like, I really think you would be interested in this. And I was like, okay. I met Troy that November. Well, Troy was wanting to see what I could do, so he talked to another person we knew that does Raging Spoon Customs. And Spoon had been working on this project where he was building basically like a snap together diorama set.
Okay.
Called Complex. And he had this Wave 1 had just released, and he had this idea for Wave 2. And what started out as a couple of pieces to enhance the Complex set turned into over 100 SKUs to have made by this factory in China.
Whoa.
It was crazy. And I did all the modeling for that. And like so many things, the Chinese factories and the drama that happens over there is so unbelievable. It would make awesome books.
Yeah.
I heard about people like all these guys were using this one factory and toys, some of them O-rings, some of them not. And the guy that ran the factory got into gambling debt, and the government found out, Chinese government found out, so they shut the factory down completely.
Yeah.
Started liquidating all the assets. So another guy that has a pretty popular toy company now, he was at that factory. He took a little more of a proactive approach and, hired some people to help him, and they went in and they got his molds out. But other people weren't so lucky. And other people had to find other factories and kind of start over. And there was a lot of things that happened just that one factory going down. But yeah, so so Troy was like, well, I'm going to find out what he can do. So he hooked me up with Raging Spoon. Spoon did his thing. That November, we at Assembly Required in Iowa, in Des Moines, Iowa. We went to that show. I'd been before, but we went that year. I met Troy, and he was just like, I want to do Cold War Russians. And that was really all he had to say. I don't remember what he said for the next 10 minutes. I just remember Cold War Russians, O-ring figures. And I was just like, sure, whatever you want, man. I'll make whatever. I'll draw whatever you want. I'll model whatever you want. Time went on, and Red Laser had some other things going on. And Troy and I decided to push forward with Call Sign Longbow. And that's how that started. It was a whole journey to get there. But I think I was telling you backstage earlier, my dad was a huge military buff about, things that were kind of the bad guy stuff. He loved like the stuff that the German air power, the late stuff the Nazis were working on, jet engines and possible spacecraft and all kinds of stuff. We would always go to the government bookstore and get books about Soviet military power. They put out a yearbook every year, and we would talk about all the stuff the Russians were working on, and went to see Red Dawn, and we talked about Red Dawn and how possible that was, and so it was. I was so excited to tell my dad, like, guess what I'm going to be doing? Guess what I'm going to be making? So that was kind of part of that. But yeah, when Troy said we were going to do Soviet military stuff, because Hasbro couldn't do that during the Cold War because they were afraid it would just make things worse or stir up feelings of either resentment or worse, people sympathizing, with the Soviets, and the government didn't want us doing that. So that was how that came to be, and that was our, we knew right up front that we were going to have Soviet troops, no matter what. So we started crafting this entire storyline around how this happens and how the Longbow team that's their job, is to basically just disrupt communist operations everywhere. That was their job. So they end up coming across this Russian team and get their pants. They beat these guys pretty bad, and so the Russian government decides, okay, we're going to create a team, and their job is to stop callsign Longbow from disrupting communism, the spread of communism. So that's pretty much what callsign Longbow is those two teams fighting all the time.
Well, that's, you talk about that, like, I remember that, in the G.I. Joe, Hama kind of touched that with the October Guard, and I think he now you say, I can tell, I now notice that he struck a very careful balance between distinguishing the government of the Soviet Union and how it operated versus the men on the ground, which he did with G.I. Joe too. Is focus on we always didn't have that, that a soldier fought for their country, and they didn't, they did it whether their country was right or wrong, because that's what you were, you trained, you signed up to do, type of deal. And then I just recently got there was a series comic book called The Nth Man. I don't know if you ever saw that back. Which was really good, where the Soviets were the out and out bad guys. In that whole thing. And that was a kind of thing. But but you grew up in the Cold War, and going back to kind of the designers that you met from Hasbro. The story I heard about, these guys actually had reference material to stuff, because it couldn't just do the M1 tank was the Mobat, so they had to make changes because they couldn't use and the Dragonfly was a Cobra helicopter, so they had to make changes to it, but they had to have the reference materials right down to the weapons. And I kind of that's why I kind of look at the guys today. It's like the folks that are running G.I. Joe for Hasbro today have a really easy job, because they're basically just standing on the shoulders of these guys that did all the design work before. So I can tell they're not researching a damn thing when they go with
no. And even when you talk to the people that they had, that they brought in to help them, try to make things more military realistic, those guys will even tell you, like, I told them not to do this, and that they did it anyway because they thought it looked cool,
So I just wondered the calls on long. So that's been up. So are they released now, or I thought
we have one figure that finally made it to the States. Most of the rest of the figures are all in production.
Okay.
We had a hiccup. I talked about it on one of the last shows I did. There was a miscommunication about the head joint, and we had found out that every mold that they had cut, this mistake was in it. We could have just said, okay, just send it that way anyway. But one of the things that we were pushing right up front was this interchangeability with the real American hero. We wanted it really to feel like they just kept going. And if you weren't able to take a Flint head and put it on one of our characters, that would totally destroy all of the point of what we were trying to do. We want the figures
Right.
to feel vintage. We want you to hear the rattle in the package, all those things that made you love the GI Joes and makes you think about the original GI Joes, the Real American Hero line. And that's what we were trying to capture. That's what we want. We understand Delta 7 making some kind of postmodern stuff super awesome, but it feels like it is in the same universe, but they're more modern figures, or modern style. Not the figure itself; it's an O-ring figure, obviously, but the Delta 17 stuff is so amazingly cool. But that wasn't what we wanted to do. We really wanted to place this in the Cold War, and if you were playing in that timeline, you would need Russian troops. So that has always been our, even though we wanted to have a story about characters that you would like or not like, or want to be or have the figure, all that is part of the marketing and the drive behind it. But at the end of the day, the idea is to have some realistic, for that time frame, toys that mimic what we couldn't have because of the time. It just wasn't allowed.
Or almost, so I'm looking at it right now. It's all totally seemed like there would have been characters that. So, like I said, I was very careful with my toys, especially Joe, because I was kind of like the everything. But everyone's saying that one's going to break, an arm's going to break, or knees, And the day I discovered that little screw in the back opened up the figure, and a couple of bottles of Tester's paint from Walmart.
Yeah,
you can. So a lot of us were building our own Joes, before Steel Brigade.
Oh yeah.
That I can see a lot of these were probably based on some ideas probably we had as kids. That
it was like we wanted to have archetypes. So you've got your Green Beret. Lancer's your typical Green Beret. We've got a urban assault specialist whose color palette is very much like GSG-9, the German anti-terrorist group. We have characters that are still to be released. We have a Delta Force sniper. They are characters, but they're also archetypical. We have a pararescue trooper. He's one of the main characters in the comic. So we have these guys. We have these archetypes in the comic book, and you can buy the comic book. Issue 1 still available. Number 2 is coming soon, I hope. We've got it all written and drawn. The artist has drawn it. Lettering's done. Colors are pretty much done. I think it's just a matter of getting them made. But that story is following those guys. But they are supposed to be archetypes of basically a character build from that time.
Well, I'm looking at the Marine, because that's right up my alley right there, and I appreciate that y'all give it just from the illustrations. I'm assuming that the weapon that you're going to try to get is that M60 Echo 3. The E3, because that's what we had when I was in.
That was First Blood Part 2.
Yeah,
that was the gun Rambo had, was the 3. So we were like, oh, he's got to have that one. So, it's just like, so we were developing weapons. And that's the funny thing. Troy and I had 20 weapons we knew we had to include no matter what.
Yeah.
And it seems like the regular M61 is pretty popular. There's lots of versions of it. But that one that Rambo, hauled around in First Blood Part 2, that one wasn't so known except for in the Rambo line. That came in the Rambo line. They had that.
It was a lot lighter to carry that E3. They stripped a lot of weight off of it from the old one that Rock and Roll had.
Right.
So that's kind of I was kind of surprised. So like I said, that's the attention to detail that I love. And like I said, I think that's goes back to saying to have that frame of reference. And because but we came up in a time when there was no internet, so you had to. So everything was like a trip to the library to research for school, and then you had to memorize a lot of stuff if you ever wanted to find it again. I can remember
when it was like a few cents when the library first got a copy machine. Man, I was up there just making crappy copies of books. They were terrible, terrible photocopies. But yeah, I remember like having just manila folders just full of things that I had printed out of books.
That
Copied
that's
out of
why
books.
when the copy machine said that, it was a game changer for me because I used to have little folders of Star Trek stuff that I would copy off out of books, spaceships and military stuff, and it's all kinds of things. But that's why when the trivia and everybody talks when I'm chiming in on the chat, stuff that it's like, well, that's just that's all that stuff just stuck with me over the years because I had no choice now to carry it around. So it's and then again, we talked about this earlier too. There's something about cracking open, especially
we were talking
a reference book.
Yeah, this was the one that we got every year. Every year, I've had this one since. This is the same one I've had all these years. But they would go through and they would just show you everything the Russians were doing that year.
Yeah,
and I loved these. I think over the years I had 4 or 5 of them, but every year they would come out with one. The government bookstore, and you could get it. They would have like there was supplements. There was a naval special operations one. That was the first time that I really learned what SEALs really were. Was from that book. It had all this stuff, and it had this little chapter on Navy SEALs. And I was like, oh, okay, because I knew about torpedo. He's a Navy SEAL, but none of the Navy SEALs in that book were like frogmen. They were all, they all looked like contractors. They had blue jeans and everything else. But yeah, that was
also too. I was kind of that way too, where the enemy stuff was very fascinating. To like Cobra was always like one of my favorites in the G.I. Joe line, in the Soviets and going back to the Germans. And I think a lot of it was because because we had some really cool stuff on our side, as well. And then you grow up and you later learn about how much we stole from each other.
Right.
But what made that even more fascinating to me is that the designs were very much influenced by their culture and their level of technology.
Right.
That they had. And Soviet military doctrine had its own had its own philosophy behind things. So they would take something that we would make elegant, and highly doing functional, and they go, well, we can't reach that point yet, so we'll brute force, as much as we can, and that brute force has its own design philosophy as well. But so everything had like this otherworldly,
Oh yeah.
It looked just like ours, but different type of deal. With that, so like I have 4 sons, and so that one thing, and I was like thankful to have this because I could, that was like my excuse to keep buying certain things. That was a father, G.I. Joe had really run out by the time my firstborn. Well, I mean, they started the new line, so it's kind of like they're too little for that to touch. And then then at that time I was really into the 12-inch in the early 2000s. We talked about Dragon. So I was big. 21st Century Toys really kicked it off for me. I liked it better than the Hasbro stuff because it was more realistic than than Hasbro's kind of put us. So they just had that design where it's like, and then I got it, and then by the time the internet has fully come, to life, and so I'm ordering like the Dragon 12-inch figures and blue box toys and Hot Toys and stuff like that. So of course that's stuff that I'm not going to hand that over to a toddler, because I'm having trouble not breaking it myself.
You remember those first blue box military figures that had the rubber faces where you could open their mouths?
Yeah, it had the little key thing you put in the back of their neck, and they could. Yeah, those were, and they did some amazing stuff with die cast for weapons.
They did.
That was really cool. But Dragon really had the ball going with the weapons. I love that stuff. So with my kids, so my first couple, it was really Hot Wheels, which is really cool. because that's something I could get down and play with them with. And then my oldest one really took to Transformers.
Oh wow!
At that time. So, and so it's kind of one of these things that early on as a father, me and my wife, we both set some goals that our kids would only know something was important if we showed them it was important by our actions.
Right.
So like I said, if we want our kids to go to church regularly and do all that stuff, then we had to be involved in that stuff so they could check, because they're going to model what we have. So I kind of feel that that's kind of with the collecting, that's how they picked up. Now my kids are all born after 2000, so and it's like each one of them kind of picked up a little, not all of my collecting bug, but like they're in Gen Z, that I kind of think they collect hobbies more than they collect actual things, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think, we were talking before when we were backstage, we were talking about that our generation, like having those hobbies and having those things, you always had people that put a negative connotation on it. We were talking about D&D. Like I can remember when everybody was like, "Oh my God, don't play D&D. It'll turn you into a zombie, and you'll think you're the character and all this and all these things were going on." So I think that for us, and some people that are our age may disagree with this, but I think we still have that connection because we feel like we earned it.
Yeah.
We put up with the stigma of, "Oh my God, you're 17 and you still buy toys."
Yeah.
"Oh, you're 25 and you still buy toys." Like we dealt with that. Now that is common. Like now it is almost, my God, the people that buy pops, the people that buy those, just, they don't, it's something that's readily available. You can buy it at almost any type of store that carries any sort of toy. They'll have pops.
Yeah.
People buy those. It's just so readily available. But for us, it wasn't like that. For us, it was fine. You had all that stuff in the Sears catalogs and the Penny's catalogs and all that stuff you could order. But there was a stigma to being an older kid and still wanting to play with toys. So I think for a lot of us, it's kind of like we earned the right now to have toys. Like we were in the trenches when nobody was okay with that,
And we also have the income to get, because there's a lot of stuff that we couldn't get, because of, like I got, one of the things I loved about G.I. Joe, is what really made it very successful, was that when you were a kid in the 80s and you walked into a store, and it was everywhere. It wasn't, towards every store, whether you had $5 or $50, you were going to find something that would spend that money on that fit the entire universe. If all you had was the money for a figure, then you had a figure that went with the other figures and rode on all the vehicles. If you bought the Skyhawk, you could land it on the deck of the flag, just like you could a skyscraper, and vice versa. So, and now they really don't have that nowadays, because everything's at a price point, a singular price point now.
Yeah.
With that, but what I found is that, especially with my kids, they have found other things, and again, and then also the stigma isn't there anymore. So, like I got one that he's really into. Even at his age, he on his Instagram, he'll host Pokemon cards, opening them up, and that Pokemon's been around for a while, and dozens of people watch him just do that, of all of his peer group. So it's kind of interesting.
It's different. It's encouraged now, kind of. Being quirky is pretty cool, and shows like Big Bang Theory and things like that have kind of like mainlined all that to where it's just common now.
And it gives us sometimes, especially through their teenagers, it gave me something to talk about, with them. And especially my oldest kid, like he knows way more about Transformers lore going back to Generation 1 than I do, and all that stuff, so I ask him questions whenever I say, "Did they do this or is this the Japanese one?" He's like, "Oh yeah, well they did this and all that stuff um and all that." So with your son, was it just kind of a kids, dad do kids see type of deal, or did you kind of encourage him into? Yeah, because he's got some really good skills when it comes to doing this stuff, and that's something
He
that
does
you don't
that comes
naturally develop
from,
that stuff.
Mikey as a person. I mean, he's fun and he's good to be around, but all his life he had, especially when he was a teenager, he started having, like anger and anxiety issues. Not necessarily anxiety, but
Yeah,
like there was something that he wanted to get out. And I think that in painting he finds a bit of peace. Like that is something he can do. My dad painted. My dad did
yeah.
uh, uh, pastel chalk, renderings. He would do a sermon, and while he was doing the sermon, he would sketch out the scene
Oh yeah,
on a piece of paper, and like you just find an outlet for how you feel, and maybe it's shooting guns, maybe it's golfing, maybe it's doing all these, maybe it's working out at the gym. I think Mikey finds his place, his zen in that, creating something and painting something. His hands are way steadier than mine, you know. But when
yeah.
he was a kid, uh, when he was small, the X-Men cartoon was out,
Okay,
and he loved that. And Toy Biz was coming out with like every character that was on the show,
yeah.
and so yeah, I was always buying him Toy Biz stuff, and then he started seeing some of the stuff I was doing with the GI Joes and taking them apart and painting them, and he just started messing with them. He started taking them apart, and making his own, and then he did. It's sad to say he did grow out of it. He was done with it, and I mean, we still talked about the stuff, and he was always wanting to see the stuff I was buying, and always thought something was cool, and he might get something once in a while, but it wasn't it wasn't that he was. He was finding who he was. He was a young adult, and he was finding who he was. And I don't know what happened. We went to that. Joe Joe Con that one year, and then the next year we went to Joe Fest, I think it was, and he discovered the modern GI Joe figures, that style of figure, and he it just went from there. He started out just basically collecting them, and then he started learning what the pieces could do and taking them apart and all that, and he just went from there. And so it's kind of funny at the time when I was trying to become a 3D modeler and trying to become
Hmm.
a little bit involved in some things in the industry. Mikey had taken this other path of customizing and doing that sort of thing. So it's kind of cool. About the same time, we both kind of had kind of epiphanies on what we wanted to do, and that's crazy because I mean, Mikey and I always have had things to talk about. Mikey and I, when we're together, we almost speak our own language,
Yeah.
and it's generally a mixture of English, um, things from the Urban Dictionary, and quotes from Will Ferrell movies. It's pretty much the language, and it's so.
Okay, so because one of the things I said he can't be old enough to remember to have been around for the Will Ferrell, Harry Carey sketches on Saturday Night Live. So he
Well,
must have
I
somehow
don't
picked
know
that
that
up
he saw
somewhere.
those live. I bet he did. I bet he did. He's past 30. He's
Okay,
seen some. He's at
he
the
just
top
looks a lot
end of that
younger. Yeah.
millennial scale. So yeah, and he loved that too. But we'll just quote a movie, and we know what movie we're talking about. People will just shake their heads because they have no idea what we're saying, and it's
Uh,
pretty fun.
Look
But
at
we've
those
always,
couple over
we've
there.
built cars together. We've done all kinds of stuff together. So even if it wasn't GI Joe, even if it wasn't, customizing action figures, it was working on cars, or it was, dealing with the same kind of personal things at the same time. And we've always had that. So it's kind of cool that we started out here, and now we're here, and we had this whole thing in between to get to those 2 points. And so I think that's part of what makes it so fun doing this with him now.
So one of the things I've seen you guys work on, now after you tell me a little bit more about them, is it looks like you guys are making kits to enhance, for lack of a better word, some of our 6-inch figures and stuff like that. And I know you said you lean more towards the space. I think one of the episodes I backwatched, you were doing the Dravinsky,
the flamethrower.
But how detailed that was, like, with the manifold, like this is how a flamethrower would have to work,
Yeah.
But so what's the goal? What is that behind that? And what's the goal with that? And are you going to make them so that ham-fisted dummies like me could be able to use them to, on figures?
Yeah. So the idea with what we're trying to do is we're trying to make kits that, with a little painting skill, you can put together a character or a likeness or something, like that. We don't want you to have to cut and saw. We did the episode where we cut apart the Buzz Lightyear figures and made Star Brigade figures. That's a lot of work, right?
Yeah.
That takes some time. That takes some effort and some heavy cutting and carving and hoping everything goes back together right. But what we really wanted to do was make it so that I could sell you this kit. I could show you what Mikey and I came up with using this kit. Maybe we'll do a show where we show you how to paint the kit. We show you how to build the kit. And then you can buy on the coupleofkuks.com. You can buy the kits. We started with the homage to the Action Force Assault Trooper. That was the first one. And it basically, it's made out of a flint or a Duke body with a dusty harness, a Duke belt, and then our pieces. And you could just make this figure. So that was kind of what started it. We were on our way home from DFW last year. We were energized from the workshop we were in, and it was just kind of like we should do something together. And it kind of set for a couple of months, and then I came to him and said, "Hey, I got an idea," and he liked it. We started doing the Couple of Kuks show just to for people to meet us and the things that we like to do. We did a show where we did lazy customs, which basically you just take a couple of figures, and we were showing you how to just boil and pop and put together a figure without even having to paint it. In fact, that was the rule of the episode, was that you don't even have to paint these. These are just straight off of something that already exists. You put these parts together and you make these.
Yeah, I need to watch that episode, because I'm very much afraid and I see how people do it, where they pop the figures apart, and I'm very much afraid to do that, because, again, like I said, it's I tend to break things.
Well, the thing with the classified and Valaverse figures, the 1/12 scale figures, unlike O-ring figures, there's not a lot that really breaks unless it was already prone to break. If you've got an ankle joint that it was already going to break, it's going to snap off no matter what you do. But with boil and pop or using a heat gun, people are scared of a heat gun because you can get things too hot, you can burn things. But with boiling water, really the only thing you have to worry about is when you pull it out and you handle it in your hands, not burning your hands.
Right.
And we've got. I know there's. I can't remember if the Buzz Lightyear episode, it might have even shown how to boil and pop. But that's definitely one of the things we're going to cover in our workshop at DFW is boil and pop and heating things up and popping joints. But they become so soft, it all just kind of just pops apart. It's so nice. So there are some things that if you want to separate are going to take a little more surgery, but the way that the classified figures are made, the waist piece comes off. Everything comes off with just a little heat. In fact, even something as tight as barbecue's vest with the right amount of time in the warm water will slide off. It just takes some work without having to cut it. And so that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to get everybody. We want to make customs that you can take a figure, the build that you like, and add our pieces to it by just painting them, doing a little prep work on the 3D print, painting them, and put them on your figure. So the Dragonsky kit is one of those. I had done some Dragonsky work for Raging Spoon in his 1/18 scale custom stuff. Makes actual resin print or resin, copies.
Yeah.
So he doesn't use 3D printed parts. He'll use a 3D printed part and then he'll cast it and then make resin parts. So with the LPO 50, the flamethrower, the Russian flamethrower, I had modeled that for him, and I modeled the helmet, but we didn't have a chest piece, and so it was kind of the idea that, okay, well, so I blew those parts up, and of course, when you model something in 1/18th scale, the detail is on a totally different level than 1/12th and 1/6. So I kind of remodeled the helmet. The flamethrower was actually a pretty good piece. The handle, I had made the handle more realistic. The Russian flamethrower, the handle is really wide.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of hold it. It's a very strange design. I'm not sure why they did it that way, but I swear sometimes when I look at Soviet,
it was cheap to do it that way.
Yeah, Soviet weapons, sometimes I think that they were just as much to cause the user pain as it was who's on the other end of the weapon. But anyway, so I had modeled it, but for 1/12 scale, I needed more detail, so I remodeled it. The tank, the way that the backpack is made on that, the manifold comes off the bottom, the top pops off the top, so you can paint the tank separately. There's a whole bunch to that, and then we also wanted to be sure that you could use the standard GI Joe classified hose.
Okay.
It comes with tripwire, comes with Televiper, Techno Viper, so everything uses that hose. Dragonsky uses that. The Sci-Fi kit, Sci-Fi V2 kit, it uses that same hose. But that's the idea, is that around $25 you can buy this kit. You can make a character that we're pretty sure Classified's not going to make a V2 Sci-Fi. I might be wrong.
Still waiting on the V1 Sci-Fi. Well,
yeah,
still waiting on Flash.
I can't even get my bright green laser. I can't even get my red pad laser trooper yet. So that's what the goal is. Is we just want to make kits that are fun, that don't make you pull your hair out. We do videos on how to put them together. We do all this kind of stuff because we want everybody to want to do it. We want to have something that you may not be like a super awesome customizer, but you could buy one of our kits and put together a pretty reasonable kit. There are some things you can't do that with, but that is kind of our goal.
Well, I think it's amazing because, I can't tell you how many times I've bought something with the intention to customizing it, and I start taking it apart, and then it ends in frustration, tears, and another toy in the trash can going out the especially when you start getting into cutting things. And then about the closest I've done to it is I got in the back there, I got an X-wing, the one in the middle. That's one of those what year did that come out? It was the first year they did the full, in the Power of the Force line, did the full size X-wing with cockpit that opens, and you put the RT unit in the back, and so I had that for years, and it was in a box in the garage that got flooded, and so I took it out. So now it had gunk and all kinds of stuff on it, and I said, well, I want to restore it, so what I wound up doing is I just wound up painting it, and then I had some primer paint, so I painted it gray, and then I went and got the Krylon stuff for their camo line, and I did green on it, so I made like a Corellian Defense Force X-wing out of it. So that's the extent of the customization. Is I was able to, I didn't have to take it all apart to do it. I just taped off and masked, and then I had an A-wing that the same fate happened to it. It's halfway painted, but I had to take that apart because the landing gear had collapsed in it, and I had to fix that. But then I lost all the screws that go into it. So that's kind of, but anything else I bought where I've taken it apart, and then the way they build toys now, like vehicles especially, they've got all these screws that don't make sense of why they're in there, and then they got the force fit pieces in there that I always want to break, and then again, if you have to cut something, then once you start, if you don't plan it out right, then you're looking at
absolutely
a big mess. So I like the idea of something that would kind of encourage people to customize, but have the confidence that they're not going to screw it up to the point where they're throwing the kit and a destroyed figure
right
away.
The
to make it fun.
The hook of the business, though, is that if you think that one of our kits is beyond your abilities, we have a guy that can paint that up for you.
Okay.
So obviously Mikey can build you a custom with one of our kits. So if you're not comfortable doing the camo pattern, or you're not comfortable painting the joints or any of those things, that's you just on the website, you just go to the page that's for his stuff, and you say, hey, Mikey, what would it cost me to make this figure? What would it cost me to do this? And he'll give you the rundown. He'll tell you, like, this is what it would cost to make this. This is what it would cost me to put this together. Wednesday night, he's going to be working on the sci-fi kit.
Okay.
That was one last week. I think everybody picked it. I think we were kind of surprised because he had Pathfinder, Dragonsky, and the sci-fi kit, and everybody's like, sci-fi kit. So that's what he ended up picking. So that's what he's going to be building Wednesday.
So what was the website again?
coupleofkuks.com. That's our webpage.
I'm trying to bring it up over here. A couple.
Just couple without A on it.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can bring it up. Okay, yeah, there it is. I'll definitely look forward to that. So do you have any kits actually available right now, or?
Yeah, everything for the Action Assault is there. You can build that Action Assault Trooper. And Mikey did build one of those on his JMK Custom Works channel a few weeks ago. Over a couple of different weeks, he worked on those kits. To put one of those together.
You've done the better Iron Grenadier helmet.
Yeah, I do have those available too.
See, that was always one of my favorite. So Destro was like my all-time top favorite Cobra growing up. And then especially when he spun off his, so that first Iron Grenadier is like my favorite. And then for some reason, as they've done further iterations of Iron Grenadiers, they look more like German army soldiers than,
Right.
Than something that a Scottish nobleman would, choose for his army. So I like that original head on there. So yeah, that's amazing. I like that. Something I have to like pay attention more and learn more. That's because that's what I do. That's what I'll learn to do. Just about everything now is watching YouTube videos how to do something, maybe gain some confidence and to get over some of my fears of breaking or destroying stuff. So
yeah, it's pretty hard to break a classified figure. They
come pretty broken a lot of times.
Sometimes they do. Some of the joints are not great, but popping them apart is pretty easy, especially if you're doing one that has the pinned joints, one of the early figures.
Yeah.
They look ugly with the pins in them, but man, they're so much easier for customizers to work with.
Well, is it just as easy to get it back together as just to take them apart? That's the other side of the coin.
Yeah, you warm it back up and you start popping the pieces together.
Do they come with do the kits come with instructions?
No, you got to watch our videos for that so we can get the shares and likes.
Nice. What do they call that? Vertical integration? Is that
just like the fact that Mikey can paint it for you, I can model it for you. Watch our show, we'll tell you how to put it together.
So these are 3D printed?
Yeah. Yeah, I use a resin that if you need to, you can run it under hot water and it'll soften it up if it's not quite fitting right or any of that.
Okay.
The pouches are specifically made to fit on the dusty harness to clip over the pouches that are on it. So you just put a little dab of glue in there and stick them on, and they're on.
Okay. So does it actually? I'm trying to look. Does it actually have the recommendation which figure you use for it, or?
Yeah. It in fact, you can buy a builder kit. You don't have to, but you can buy a builder kit that has all the pieces you need. But basically, you take yourself an early Flint or Duke body, whichever one you like better. The main difference is the boots, obviously.
Okay.
We thought the shin guards were appropriate for that. That figure had some weird, I guess you would call them mucklucks, like with what the Hoth troopers wore. That's kind of what the original figure looked like, but we thought we could have the strap look and everything with the leg armor just to give him a full look.
I see now. So the so I found the builder pack with the Duke or Flint body, Dusty harness.
Yeah, so if you already have those parts, and we started that whole project because we were like, at that point, the Flints were starting to hit at Ross. You could buy the Tiger Force Duke with the bike at Ross. I mean, they were readily available figures, and the Flints are still fairly inexpensive to get a hold of. So that was the idea. We wanted to take a figure. The kit that we're working on for DFW will use a Destro body. So these are figures that are readily available, fairly easy to find. Sometimes you can even get good deals on them at shows because they're the older ones, and people get rid of boxes of toys when they give up, or when the kids give up, you can still find them.
So have y'all? So unfortunately, it looked for a short period of time that I was going to be able to go to DFW, and just things have changed our schedule, and some life events are going on. So I'm not going to have to be able to make it this year. So have you guys revealed what the build for you guys are for DFW, or?
Yeah, in fact, yesterday and 2 weeks before we started kind of talking about it, but yesterday I actually ran through how I create it, and it's going to be an homage to the old Fisher Price Firestar 1 little black, this little dude here.
Okay, yeah.
It's going to be an homage of this guy.
And you're using the Destro body for that, or?
Basically, we're going to be, imagine if the Buzz Lightyear builds that we did had custom armor that wasn't a Buzz Lightyear.
Okay.
So that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a kit where you can build that figure, walk out of there ready, take it home, add paint to it, or whatever you want to do. We're going to do it all in black with the Destro body, and you can walk out of there with a figure you can start displaying right now. But yeah, that's the whole idea. It'll have a blue head. You'll have an astronaut bubble helmet. So every other week on the Couple of Kuks show, whereas Mikey's show talks about him painting, on the Couple of Kuks show, we're going to talk about me building this astronaut kit.
Okay.
So I'm recording all my work and running through it fast so that people can see it. 2 weeks ago, I did the gun. Just because I knew what I wanted the gun to look like, so I made the gun in a CAD program, and then the show yesterday was all in Blender 3D modeling program.
I think like this would be something cool. And this is just my 2 cents, and so you can take it for what it's worth. I always say that one of the things that Hasbro has been missing is, especially now, is because everything's catered to the adult collector, just about. Is taking some of the older Joes and retiring them and turning them into Action Force, like they did, not Action Force, Adventure Team. That they did back
I would love that. I think that's a cool idea. I'm kind of hoping, who knows what they're going to do, but I was kind of hoping with the introduction of the firefighter figure that maybe they would get to the point where they would do those deluxe boxes of Adventure Team characters. They could reuse Joe part. I mean, I understand. I'm a toy maker. I understand reusing parts. You could do that. You could reuse parts, and you could make you could do each one of them. You could have a land adventure, sea adventure. Come with a raft. Guy come with a campfire set. Whatever you want to do, they could do that. And I keep thinking that's where they're going when they did the firefighter, because that's the first one that was a non GI Joe character.
Well, but Lena, this thing you guys do, it'd be cool to do, like, I would say, like a stalker and turn him into the Jungle Adventurer. Build a kit for that, or shipwreck into a sea adventure. I think it's kind of where they're missing that bridge in there. But I also like the space idea too. I don't care what people say. Once your line goes to space, doesn't kill the line. That's on how you execute that.
That's right. That's right. They do that. I think that happened, and it happened in the 70s because at the time when a lot of companies went that way, you had the moon landing in '69, so there was this entire space craze. But a lot of those toy companies didn't latch onto that until 7, 8 years later. And by that time, we were dealing with the oil embargo. We were dealing with all these other things. The price of plastic was going up. The stuff was becoming more expensive. And, we were in the middle of a serious inflation crisis, 78, 79, 80. So people were cutting pennies wherever they had to. And unfortunately, toys were an easy thing to say, like,
And we had the Vietnam backlash too.
And we had that. And I think that was the idea with the space lines, was that people thought, oh, well, if I do that, if I do this, it's not military, right? Same with Adventure Team. The whole idea there was, okay, this isn't military. These guys are just adventurers. So there's always that. Troy and I even toyed around with doing that. The parent company is Grindstone Toys, and Grindstone Toys is Troy and I. And the concept there was, this was a self-made company where we didn't have a whole board of people. We didn't have all these people. Troy and I do a lot of the work. So that was nose to the grindstone, right? And that was kind of how that name came about. But we when we first introduced call sign Longbow at Assembly Required, we just showed it to a bunch of people that we knew to see what they thought. And one of the things we pitched back then was like an adventure kind of line. I've wanted a really good seaplane for a long time.
Oh yeah.
I was a big Tales of the Golden Monkey fan when I was a kid. And he had a seaplane. The whole show was based on him and his seaplane.
Well, as we come towards the end of this, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you is, do you have a dream project? Like, that the time and the money is really no limit. You got all the tools and materials you need. It's like locking the A-team in the tool shed, type of deal. Is there a dream project that you would?
There is. I have this concept in my head, and I'm using this Couple of Kuks thing is our way of seeing if that will work. But I want to do a line of toys that is customizable, but not to the point of unrecognizable. I want to introduce some kits. I want to introduce some sets of things where you can build it how you want within reason. There was a game. There's still, I say was, a game called XCOM. Yeah. And in XCOM, there's several aspects of that game that are fun and that are interesting to do, but the main core of the game is setting up your team. And you're setting up you got like your sniper type, you've got your heavy, you've got your infantry, you've got your this and that, your spy. So you build these characters, but they all each category has one type of armor, and you can add pieces to the armor. I remember one of my favorite things was this heavy with this massive suit, and he's wearing a private eye hat, from the 20s.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm just like, okay, that would be totally cool. You can make these guys what you want them. They come with decal sets to put all kinds of decals on them, mold them in different colors so that people can build, the color they like. Lots of things like that. And I've talked about this a couple of times in the last few shows I've been on. I want to get vehicles made here in the United States again.
Yeah.
I want to try to be in front of that a little bit. I'd like to get people to, it has been a long time. We don't have the complete infrastructure, but it's not totally gone. And something like that, I think there's plenty of small plastic injection molding companies, even locally to me, that would jump on a project like that if they thought there was an ROI. So if I had a blank check, today, I would start putting money away to either, get me a little plastic injection system going, make some vehicles, make some different scales of figures. I will always love 1/6 scale. That will always be my favorite scale. And it's just because of the level of detail and the customization without painting. It's just a matter of, oh, here's a camouflage pattern I like. What can I do with this? Oh, I'm going to make this. And you just start finding pieces and put it together. I want to give you all the pieces. I'm going to give you sets where you can do it your way, you know. But I also love 1/12 scale because it's the in between scale. Not
Well,
everybody can. Not everybody can. You know what was a $20-$25 figure when Mikey was younger. You know, all those you were talking about, the GI Joes, the
yeah,
12-inch GI Joes. The price ranges of those were anywhere from $12 to $22.
yeah.
You know, you could buy an accessory set for around $12. It might have been guns. It might have just been rehashes of some of their older stuff. They would all mix and match it, you know. And then you could buy uniform sets, and you could buy all these different things. That price range is a little higher now, but it exists. There's a company that makes 12-inch figures that are around $22 a piece. Now they've made thousands of them,
Yeah.
and that would be ideal to me. Is just to get this concept, lay it out, and then just start building the crap out of stuff to sell.
You know, with the birth of 3D printing and how far that's come in a short amount of time, I have a good friend of mine, and I had him 3D print some missiles for the Hasbro, the TIE Striker from Rogue One, because they had the
Mm-hmm.
those came with Nerf darts and they had little hanging hard points for
Right.
Nerf darts. I don't want it. So my thing, I was like, well, I could just take the hard point off because it's just so screwed and pop out. But then if I want to sell it again, then I got to try to find it. So I said, what if I had some because it's supposed to be an atmospheric and low orbit fighter? It's like, why don't I have some Star Wars ship missiles? And he printed out some fantastic. And this is great. I said, I remember when 3D printing was first announced, you had to have this big machine with a tub of plastic powder that they would print it in. And now he's got like 4 or 5 small printers, and it is still there's still challenges and struggle with that. I've been surprised that, and I don't know if it's because of the advent of 3D printing, that there really hasn't been any new advances in injection molding. Whereas,
I think that injection molding is at its peak in that there's not a lot left to do. Once people started using the electrode style cutting of the tools, like what they use in China now, where you get the super high detail without a router cutting it.
yeah,
EDM, I think is what that's called. Once that kind of caught on and it's become more and more available, and people are understanding how to make that work, even here in the States, people are making like their own plastic injection machine out of a drill press, with a
yeah,
hopper on it, a heater. And it's when something gets to the point that at one time it took a machine the size of a car to make a canopy for an airplane,
yeah,
and now I can make it in my garage. You know, I can build something in my garage. A normal vacuum forming was the same way.
yeah,
So the thing about 3D printing is 3D printing right now, the last 4 years, they stopped worrying about like layer thicknesses and stuff like that. And now it's more about the software that runs it. Now it's more about getting faster layers, smaller layers, things like that. The resin is slowly developing over the last
yeah,
12 years. That is slowly getting to where you could actually resin print something ready to go. If you bought yourself a $12,000-$13,000 printer that you're using, like someone like Garmin or Nokia uses for
yeah,
their test models, when you go into one of their test areas, Garmin, for instance, has the playground where all the engineers are just making different things. They're 3D printing those things, but they're 3D printing them out of material that feels like silicone. And they're
yeah,
printing them out of these things. But it takes a very expensive machine, very expensive resins to do that. So now what needs to happen is that becomes normalized. Those prices come down and they start really paying attention to what is next. And you've got companies like Gridiron that are using 3D printers to print vehicles. They're using 3D printers to
yeah,
make weapons and stuff like that. So technology's there. It needs some tweaking. It needs to smooth out a little bit. I think there'll always be people always will recognize Now, if you paint something up, put it on your shelf, most people aren't going to know that's 3D printed until they really look at it and maybe
Right.
see some guidelines in it, things like that. But I think that is still the hang up people have with not buying 3D printed stuff. They're still like, yeah, but I can see the print lines.
Yeah.
So that's the thing we have to get past.
Because I've been really surprised that as in the because especially for those that restore old like GI Joe and Star Wars, that there's parts that normally break because it wasn't designed to last. It was designed to be hard played with for a year or two, and then you throw it away because
yeah.
But these parts that are notoriously break, and you can't source them because it's getting harder and harder to source the good parts. That hasn't been something that people haven't started their own cottage businesses printing out Defiant panels and conquest missiles and stuff like that.
Yeah, there are some people that are doing some of that stuff. There are some people that are doing they're doing 3D prints of things that are constantly breaking. I mean, there's some great kits out there for the whale fan shrouds and the fins. There's some great kits out there for those. Some people are even casting canopies and things like that. So the cottage industries are there. It's just a matter of how do you expand that. We talked about the blank check idea. That would be top of the line things, just where I could design something and print 1,000 of them and see how they sell and not worry about it. But that's the scary part, is how much do you want to invest? What's your ROI going to be? Are you really going to make enough money to do that? Like I know for sure, like right now where Mikey and I are right now, as much as I've printed out and as much as I've done, we haven't even come close to even like breaking even on the cost of resin and that kind of stuff. It doesn't right now. It doesn't matter because we're still filling this out. We knew it would take about a year to even get to where people even knew what we were doing and saw what we were doing, would understand what it was. But we knew that up front. But sometimes you just have to decide, like, okay, which way are we going to go, and let's go that way. And I feel like investing time and effort into 3D printing, into the whole process of product design. Say you had an idea and you came to me and you were like, John, I want to make this. What do you think it would cost? Here's what I think it would cost. I can help you develop it. We can build it and see what you think. There are some people out there that would be totally fine dropping a big chunk of money to have a one of a kind 3D printed item. There are some people that would be okay dropping money to go ahead and have China make them, or have somebody else make a Jeep or like a new version of a Vamp or something, and have them made and go ahead and build a couple thousand of them and sit on that inventory until it's sold. Some people, there's people that would be happy to do that, thinking like, all I want is this vehicle and I think everybody else wants it, and I'm willing to put my money behind that.
Yeah. A lot of people, and that's the thing, is that it's a lot of people understand the business side of things. At the end of the day, and it's like so I see some people do a Kickstarter or something like that, and they're charging like a lot of money for it because I know they're having to recoup. Their goal is to either make money. You think they're going to get rich off of this, or at the very least recoup. Because nobody's got like the whole deal with when Microsoft launched Xbox, each Xbox they sold, they took a loss on.
Right.
Because they were trying to gain market share, but they had the pockets to play that game with.
Right. And, I think J-Mac said something earlier about you'd think it'd be easy because they basically have a paint by number how to do a military figure and they still can't get it right. It's the same thing, when you think about that, you think about deep pockets. So a company with deep pockets, it's going to be a lot harder to make what you want. They're going to like take what you want. They're going to throw it in front of their marketing guys, and the guys are going to be like, oh, it needs to have this. And what if it had this sticking out the side? And oh my God, it's got to have sound effects and launching missiles. And suddenly you end up with, not what you originally wanted.
Yeah.
But that's part of entrepreneurship too, is owning that and saying like, no, this is my vision. And that's the guys at Gridiron, Mark II design. those guys are 3D printing what they want to see. You know, they're not gonna let some bean counter trick them into using rubbery
Yeah.
plastic for the weapons. Nope, that's not what I want. You know, I want this. So there's a lot more. You know,
Yeah.
there is a sacrifice to the ownership of doing something like this, and that is that you understand that everything you do, everything you earn, every time
Yeah.
somebody puts money into what you're doing, you want to give them that money right back. You want to make sure that that when you buy something from me that you feel like it was worth the 25, 50, whatever you
Yeah.
paid for it, you want to be sure that it's worth that. You know, and I think that people that customize, people that work on toys, play with toys, collect toys, they understand that part of it a lot more, especially if they customize.
Yeah.
Whereas you always have the people. I always joke around. We always make the joke about I'll wait for it to be at Ross. You know, that's basically how that ended up. That kind of mentality is what killed the 4-inch GI Joe line. You know,
Yeah.
that everybody was just like, I'm not going to buy it at retail. Well, they see that as a loss. Uh, Hasbro might not have seen it as a loss, but like Walmart was like, I had to clearance all that out. Why would I buy it ever?
Yeah.
Because I paid for it. Hasbro got their money. I paid for it. But then, so when Hasbro says, "Hey guys, we got a new line of GI Joes coming out. How many do you want to buy?" and Walmart's like, "Yeah, nope. I had to clearance everything out. I don't want it."
Yeah.
You know. So it's not necessarily it's the voice of the customer, but when you're doing something like that, it's the voice of the big box stores. Their
Yeah.
voice matters more than your voice. As I don't like the gummy weapons, and all Walmart's saying is, I just don't want to have to sell them at clearance prices.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's a lot more complex than people think. It's not, if and the thing too is like, starting your own business is that a lot of people don't understand that you don't own a business, it owns you. Especially for those first
That's
few
very
years.
true. That's very true.
At least 3 to 4 years if you're lucky before you actually start generating profit on a lot of ventures.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you do. If you can't have it for the long haul, then that's the And I used to tell people all that when I was I would do stuff, and especially like people that were in technical skills that jobs I worked at. Like I worked at one place where he had for a military contractor assembling rangefinders for the Army. And so we had laser technicians, and they were all going to be engineers. That was their thing. And I said, "Well, are you taking any business classes?" And they're like, "Well, why would I want to do that?" I was like, "Because people with business degrees dictate what you can and can't do. So you got to understand if you want to do something that you have to be able to pitch that to them why it's in a business reason.
Yeah.
Or you need to at least understand, where your paycheck's coming from. So when you start seeing the sign of things, I recommend that everybody needs to take business class. You don't know how business works, and it influences everything. And I tell it's the old adage that A students always work for C students. That's that's just the way of life. If you're really good at something, you want to working for somebody that just knows how to hire people to do the things they can't do. So
Absolutely.
So John, listen, it's been a pleasure. We've been doing this for an hour and a half, and I said we'll definitely want to be respectful of your time. And I thank you for coming on. Like I said, this has been great. I said this is the only reason I started this YouTube channel was for a very selfish reason, not to because I don't do things to feed the algorithm the way it's supposed to be, and super chats and all that stuff. I just did this because I wanted to have conversations with folks. You live halfway across the country from me, so we may have occasionally at a convention or something walk past each other, but never really met.
Right.
I was just given an opportunity that I get to talk and have conversations with folks outside of just popping off smart aleck comments in the chat. So, and like I said, since I started getting more involved, like I said, you're one of the ones that kind of like I said, my kids call it a vibe, and like I said, we used to call I like the cut of that guy's jib, so it's so I do appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
So is there anything you'd like to, before we close out here? Any, I know we talked about, the couple of kooks, that which I have and Mikey stuff, and the call sign longbow and the kits. Is there anything else you want to talk about, promote on the way out, or we've covered?
We've talked about it. The Couple of Kuks podcast every other Sunday. Mikey's JMK Custom Works every Wednesday. Obviously, Mikey does the Figure It Out podcast on Thursday,
Yeah.
Thursday nights at 9. And so those are the main shows that I deal in. Like I say, we every show we try to do something interesting, something that people don't normally get to see the end.
Yeah.
We talk about the toy business. We talk about all that kind of stuff. Just because I'm in the middle of it. So, I wouldn't say I'm an insider, but kind of am. I'm very much involved in how, toys get made in China, how that works. Very much involved in design and development stuff. So I like to talk about it. I like to talk about it from my point of view, just because I have experience in all these different things. So I definitely, I hope people check out the Couple of Kuks. I know it comes on when church comes on, but hey,
yeah.
We love our replay squad.
Yeah.
We love those guys. They come check it out, even though they can't necessarily make it through the whole show or don't get there on time. And we understand that. It's just that we love the Sunday morning vibe, because for us, it's like it's early enough in the day. I'm not dreading going to work on Monday, but it's late enough in the morning I can sleep off Saturday night.
Yeah.
We kind of, it's a good time. And JMK Custom Works, when he does his show, it's a lot more about the paint side of it, how he paints, how he does that, his thought process and building and breaking apart, putting together customs. So, and you get an insight into how Mikey has the ability, to see things and be like, oh, that's used on this and this and this.
Yeah.
So he can tell you, like, well, if you want to build it this way, these are the boots you need, or you need to find one of these figures, stuff like that. And then, like, say, on the Couple of Kooks things, we talk more about stuff that is Mikey and I centric. And the last episodes and the new ones coming out will be about developing this Spaceman kit. So I encourage everyone to check those things out. We love the chat. The fans, Mikey's fans, all the way from the Harry Carey show to just painting eyebrows, painting eyebrows on figures. All that is his thing. And so we appreciate everybody that watches the shows. Appreciate everyone that gets involved, people that interact, send us questions after, all that. I love talking about this stuff. It's it's my thing. So
and for the record, if the moon was made of spare ribs, I would eat them. So that's the good thing with that. So that again, I know a lot of folks are going to catch this one on the replay. So again, if you haven't subscribed, hit like all the YouTube things. Be that when I get to 500, I'll have a special where I pay StreamYard for some bells and whistles. I can do a drawing. I've got 3 things I'll do a drawing on, but just build it. And I just thank everybody for being on and checking out. So with that, everybody have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.